You're listening to the Talkative Toastmaster podcast. I'm your host, Melanie Surplus. In this podcast, we explore how Toastmasters can help you to polish your public speaking skills, communicate with confidence, and amplify your authenticity. You'll hear from my fellow Toastmasters and I how this global organisation has impacted our lives for the better and how it could impact yours. Now, let's get talkative. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 25. This week, I'm speaking with my guest and fellow Toastmaster, Junyan Tan, who usually goes by the name of Brodie. Brodie's been a Toastmaster for about a year, and I met him when he started at Mount Gravatt Toastmasters last year after a brief stint at another club. Brodie has already proven to be an enthusiastic member of our club, stepping up to the role of secretary very soon after he joined. Brodie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Melanie. I'm really excited to be on this show. I've never been on a podcast before, and this is great experience having you as a mentor and getting on this podcast.
Well, you're more than welcome to be here, and I'm only a few episodes ahead of you in terms of podcasting, so we'll get through it. Now, I can't wait to hear about the experience you're having with Toastmasters so far, but can you perhaps by telling us, why did you originally decide to join Toastmasters?
There is a little bit of a story behind it as well. So I think it's a story that's quite familiar with. I've heard it a few times from people who have joined Toastmasters, other Toastmasters as well. So I initially Google searching through like how to improve public speaking quite a while ago now. Like my second graduate job when I moved to Brisbane in 2016, because I was starting to work as a consultant. So I wanted to learn how to speak in public better because you have to persuade people and do all that. So on searching for this, there's a lot of commercial courses that come up, but sometimes you take those with a grain of salt. And Toastmasters is something that came up quite consistently. And I first suggested to my previous professional mentor back in 2016 that I should join Toastmasters for public speaking training. And he said, yeah, definitely go for it. But yeah, as you heard Melanie introduce me, it took me, 7 years? Yeah. 7 years to get around to actually going to my first Toastmasters session. And I think a bit of that was of all the changes that actually happened during COVID as well. I think there was a lot of upheaval and all that. So I think that spurred like quite a lot of thought, like personal growth at least, also a bit of cognitive dissonance between where I was and where I wanted to be.
So it's interesting that, the lockdowns gave everyone a bit of a chance to think about what they wanted to do. And I think a lot of people emerged from COVID and took up new hobbies or took up new things to do. And it's great that you came across Toastmasters again.
Definitely. It was very, serendipitous as well. So back last year, I was working at Waterfront Place in the city in Brisbane. And there was what spurred it, because I've forgotten about Toastmasters for a while, to be honest. I think there was this thing at the back of my mind saying, I need to learn how to speak better, because I think that's one of the barriers that I was facing at work and career as well. And then there was this chance thing that came up in Waterfront Place. The Toastmasters Club that meets in Waterfront Place actually advertised in like the Waterfront Place community newsletter. Yeah.
Yep. A sign.
It's a sign.
Yeah. And was seeing that reminder again what prompted you and what got you back into that first club?
Yeah, definitely. That's exactly what it was. Plus, it was so easy because I was working on one of the lower floors and you just went up to the 13th floor. I mean, I'm not stroking a different club, but if you're in Brisbane CBD, please go to Brisbane CBD Toastmasters. It's a pretty good club.
Yeah, definitely. And look, one of the things about Toastmasters is that we absolutely recommend that people try different Toastmasters clubs and also clubs that are convenient for you. If a club is hard to get to or at challenging times, or you've got to traipse across the other side of the city to get there, you're not going to go as regularly. So we absolutely recommend going, visiting other clubs, testing them out, seeing what works and seeing what works within people's schedules. But I'm certainly glad you found us at Mount Gravatt. So I think you've been with us for not quite a year, but it must be coming on to eight or so months. It feels like it's been a while.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly when I started as well, so I can't tell you the exact date, but I think 8 or 9 months is pretty accurate.
And I think you've slotted in really well. As I mentioned, you're smack into the role of secretary, and that was a spot that became available. And again, we're grateful that you jumped in to fill that spot. What's your thoughts on the secretary role for the time you've been doing it?
I guess for me, it was a good introduction to all like the Toastmasters roles for the executive as well, because I might not be doing all the roles of the secretary correctly just yet, but for most part, what I understand from the secretary's role is you're taking the minutes, you are making sure the minutes are correct for all the executive meetings, the business meetings, and then making sure, I guess, to take attendance at the different club meetings. There's various books that we do that as well, and making sure the records are kept properly. And that gives me I think it's quite a good introduction and role to see what other people are doing, because you really need to pay attention to what you're saying. Otherwise, you make the wrong. You write the wrong minutes and write the wrong things down. So I think, and because you're not actively doing any specific changes, I'm not sure whether the secretary is supposed to do any of that or not. But for roles like the VPPR and VPE, there's certain things that you're kind of expected for the VPPR to bring in all these new members, bring in exciting new changes. For me, like, the secretary seems quite safe to start with. So I quite enjoyed that at the start.
And you're right, it is a great entree into the executive space in a club. And you do get to see, even just being on the executive committee, I find you learn a lot of extra things about the behind the scenes running of a club and all the different roles, and you just get that slightly different experience, beyond just being a member. And there's a lot to learn in the executive role. So I think a lot of us have often wondered, like, am I doing everything I need to be doing?
It's good to know that I'm not the only one. I was just going to say, like, this kind of prompted like a different thought bubble about executive roles in like clubs and things like that. When I was growing up, I didn't really participate that much. And like in school activities, you have executive members and the student council, and you go to university, there's all those unions and things like that. I always thought those things were too difficult to do, and you had to have like so much leadership potential to do that. But for Toastmasters, it's just something that everyone has to do. You have to contribute to it. So it's kind of leadership training, but you're also volunteering your time as well to do that. I didn't kind of appreciate it that much until recently, roles of Toastmasters. Yeah,
it's an interesting point. And when you're an adult in a volunteer organisation, there is that element of, well, someone's got to do it. And sometimes people do step up, sometimes they don't. And that's the nature of volunteer roles in adult organisations. So it's always I think a challenge for incoming executives or the outgoing executive whose role it is to find the next executive, basically, and to sell the benefits of those roles and the type of experience you can get by doing them. I think that's an internal marketing activity that, again, is another skill. And and also, to some extent, putting it back to the members and saying, well, this is your club. If you want a well-run club, these are the executive roles that we need to fill. Who's going to step up?
Yeah, very true about, I guess, the adult kind of executive roles in volunteer clubs and things like that. There's more roles across the world that there are people like willing to take them. So
yes, so we're always grateful when people jump in. Now, what do you most enjoy about being a Toastmaster?
I guess for my first club, I joined it like Brisbane CBD because of the convenience factor. For this second club I joined, I've actually went around to a few that are close to my house. And then I finally decided on Mount Gravatt Toastmasters just because I felt there was a very homey feeling. Like I think you talked about it in some previous podcasts as well, like to get people to go around the different clubs, because although they're all Toastmasters clubs, each of them have quite a different feel to it.
Yeah.
So different clubs might appeal to you at different points in time as well.
Yeah.
And like one of the other clubs I've gone to was actually Crest.
Oh, yes.
Down in Sunnybank Hill as well. The club leaders there were very experienced, and there was a good mix. There was a good mix of, I guess for that area, there's quite a few like Asian immigrants as well that might be starting to joining a Toastmasters, be able to actually speak and enunciate kind of better, bring that up. And like it was very welcoming, but I guess it was a bit further for me, and also that wasn't the exact fit that I was looking for at that stage. So that's why I decided on Mount Gravatt finally.
As we say, it's definitely worth checking out clubs, and they all tend to have similar roles and do things in a similar way, but they're not quite the same. So I'm glad you persisted and found a club that, you know, feels like home. And because if you're going to spend a couple of nights a month with a group of people, you want to make sure that they're the right kind of people and your kind of people. And yeah, it's definitely worth checking them out.
Yeah, it's definitely just how do you resonate, I guess, how do you mesh with the culture of the club. There's no right or wrong, it's just whomever's right for you, really.
Exactly. And in terms of skills, what would you say have been some skills you've learnt so far as during your time as a member that you can use elsewhere or that have been useful for you?
So many, like even just with the basic icebreaker speech to start with. I like how Toastmasters, if you say you're quite experienced at speaking already, then you join Toastmasters. I'm not sure why you would do that if you're an experienced speaker and you join Toastmasters, but let's say, and like you could choose to ignore all their materials and all that and come up with your own structure. But how I really appreciated the initial structure of how Toastmasters introduced that icebreaker speech at the start, like putting it in the form of a worksheet where you can actually write down sentences that actually split it into 3 parts and makes it really clear. You have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion, and then you restate it, and they tell you not to make too many points, which I think a lot of speeches tend to do, especially I'm from like a scientific engineering background. We like information, so we think that everyone else likes as much information as we do.
Yeah.
But it's not really the case. That if I'm honest, even as someone who likes information, if you give people all that information in a monotonous voice without any story behind it, I will also get bored of that information.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right about how Toastmasters packages each assignment, and there is so much information. There never used to be this much information about how to do an icebreaker speech, and here's a sample icebreaker speech, and here's, as you say, the worksheets and things you can download and checklists and all sorts of resources. And I think that's been a benefit of moving that program online through to Pathways as we now know it.
I've got a question here. Sorry.
Yes.
For breaking in. How was it like before? Like, I'm just curious.
It used to be that we would have a book. When I started, there was an actual book, and it would have everything that we could need for 10 speeches, and that was the communication or the competent leadership program, or I can't remember exactly the name, but it was an actual physical book, and the assignment would be listed on a few pages, and then the evaluation form would be in the book, and we'd take the book and people would evaluate in the book, and that was that. So it was not online for a very long time, and then it moved online.
Yeah.
Back in the dark ages.
Yeah. We all still use books and carried books around. Nowadays, it's all just iPads and laptops.
Exactly, and our phone. But that's another way that Toastmasters has had to change. And as you move through the pathway, you'll see that there's equal amounts of information and resources and downloadable tools and worksheets for each of the assignments. It's pretty comprehensive. And I think that's one of the benefits of the actual training program. You mentioned that you had been looking for commercial training programs, and not only do they cost a fortune, but they're very compressed. They might be a couple of days or maybe a week, but that's it. You don't really get to then practice in an ongoing way.
Yeah, definitely. And if you want to do that, it becomes even more expensive. You might either need to have a virtual session with a speaking coach, or go actually to someone in person. It might, I mean, I'm not saying those aren't good, but it would be pretty expensive quite quickly if you don't have a clear idea of what skills you're kind of honing. Or during my certs, I actually uncovered a few deportment and elocution
lessons.
Yes. I think those were quite popular back in the day with young ladies, especially.
They were. I actually went to one. My mother and father sent me to one when I finished uni because I must have sounded really rough. So they actually sent me to one called the June Dally Watkins School in Sydney.
That was the one that I saw online as well.
Yes, I think it rubbed off. I think I forgot those lessons. But actually, I remember that was one of the triggers for me getting into Toastmasters just after I finished uni, because I was at this deportment school learning how to walk with plates on my head and not slur my words and whatever. And one of the speakers that came in one time was a guy who was a professional keynote speaker. And he said, you should go to Toastmasters. You all should go to Toastmasters. It's great for confidence. And that reminded me that I'd remembered Toastmasters and had done a speechcraft course in high school. And that was actually one of the triggers now that you mention it.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
It is. But yeah, elocution lessons. I mean, and they were not cheap courses, and they were only very, very brief. And so there was no real chance to practice, again, speeches in the way that we get to practice them now. So,
So the elocution bit didn't really focus on any public speaking or speech. It was about...
I think we might have had to have given a speech, and it was more about pronunciation, and I'm almost saying this with my little pinky up because that's how it felt. And yeah, I think we might have had to have done one speech and just present it, which was great at the time. And I just remember that it reminded me of Toastmasters. I'm like, oh yeah. And I actually joined Toastmasters very soon after I finished uni because I had some time. So yes.
Cool.
It's interesting what you come across in your Google searches.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned the icebreaker speech and how structured it was. How did you feel after delivering that first speech? Because it's quite a milestone to get through that speech. And how did you feel after you gave that speech?
Oh, yeah, it was... I think I almost backed out on that speech a couple of times. I was thinking whether I should. To be honest, I had a valid excuse at the back of my mind, because I think right after delivering that first icebreaker speech, I was actually going on leave. And because my parents were in town and I was going to bring them around and things like that. So I could have I was actually thinking whether I should just use the excuse and not come in, because I think I actually, for that icebreaker speech, I actually went into the office on a day that I was on leave because my parents were there. But I went in just because I wanted to do that icebreaker speech.
Yeah.
I think it helped that I didn't have to work in the morning. Brisbane CBD is a lunchtime club.
Right.
And so I was able to kind of rehearse a bit and write a few things down and do all that. I was still reading from my script.
Yeah.
But it just felt good that even though I was reading, I tried not to read from the script the full time through. It felt good, definitely after the speech. And followed the structure, which made it easier.
Mm.
And it was really nice that I think the club back then, some of the club gave me like a little standing ovation, which was nice.
Yeah,
But
awesome.
yeah, but it was quite nerve-wracking. We was talking about fears, and I guess how we all have the same fears. It was, I guess, quite a bit personal for me. I think I put a few personal stories in it? I'm not sure. Maybe I was just talking in generalities, but there was, I think, like the icebreaker speech as well. Like, I quite look forward to people that are giving them now.
Yes.
Because it's the first speech that anyone in Toastmasters does, right? And you can really feel like that raw emotion, even if it's unpolished.
Yeah.
Things like that. But it's, if they're willing to do that and willing actually plan to jump into Toastmasters like head first, I think one of the new members at our club actually gave a really, really like touching and vulnerable speech in the previous session. Like, I didn't get to talk to him after, but I'm sure many of the rest of the club did. And it was like really powerful, emotional, vulnerable. You can tell it was very authentic. And I think people can feel that from the Toast, like an icebreaker speech.
Definitely. And I think we feel it firstly because we've all been there and had to do that speech, and we know how nerve-wracking it is. And what I find is that people do tend to share quite vulnerable pieces of themselves, just the snippets. And I don't know what it is about the notes in the icebreaker speech that encourage people to do that, or if people sort of go, oh, wow, I'm actually getting to tell my story. And maybe it's the first time they've really had to think about an aspect of their life and tell people that they don't know from a bar of soap. So
yeah,
it's interesting because I know the speech you're talking about, and it was very profound and very moving. And I don't know a lot of experienced speakers that would have been able to deliver that way. It was very compelling. So yeah, they're surprising, and to see other people doing their icebreakers once you've done your own too, it's like, oh, you breathe this collective sigh of relief for them. It's like, you made it.
Yeah, definitely. What you mentioned, like, it's really true. Like, that icebreaker speech, I guess, outside of something you might do in like school, like high school or university, where you have like a literal icebreaker, no one really asks you that question. And you wouldn't say anything like that in a corporate or working environment, because I mean, I don't know how vulnerable you want to be in a corporate environment. There's obviously professionalism and all that stuff that's appropriate to be shared as well. But also, even on dates, like, people don't just ask.
You're
like,
right.
yeah, I never had a date where like myself or the other person was just like, just tell me about you. Who are you? I think that's a really profound question. And I think we should be asking that question a lot more often.
It is, you're right. And I think it's about this idea of personal stories. And one, certainly in the workplace, there's very little room for it. I mean, I think you can have those one-on-one conversations with people, and that's how friendships are formed. And there might be some people out there in the world, your friends who know certain things about you, but it's such an interesting exercise to package yourself up in a 4 to 6 minute story and share it with strangers, and they listen.
And a worksheet to fill our personal story up in.
That's right. It's probably the first time a lot of people have thought about what is their story and which aspect of myself do I want to share. And I think that's why I love these podcast interviews so much. It's because it's like a 30, 40, 50-minute icebreaker, and I get to know the Toastmaster, and other people who listen get to know. And I just think that people have such fascinating stories that really there's not a lot of airtime for.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So you've got the icebreaker speech done, and you're motoring through your pathways. Have you done any other speeches, or have there been any other instances where either you were surprised at what you're being asked to do, or how's the Pathways experience been for you?
So right now, I'm just working through level 2 of the presentation mastery pathway. That's my first pathway. I think the level 1 speeches, level 1 and 2 speeches, I think they give a really good introduction to all the basics of writing a speech, giving a speech, like, vocal variety and each of this. I like how each of them, you are given only a certain part and you focus on that. Because a lot of us who are nervous about public speaking, right? It's one of the things that's so nerve-wracking is there's so many variables and so many things you have to think about. And just breaking it down like that, I think the icebreaker was the one that struck me the most. But the rest they're not boring, but they're you can see how it progresses, and each is one step on the path where you become a better speaker and you're gaining individual skills. You can go back and do a speech if you like, if you feel that you haven't done that skill well enough. And then I think in level 3 and above, I've just been looking forward a little bit. There's more interesting elective speeches up there. I'm looking forward to that. So I guess going back to your question was, are there any other speeches that
or anything about Pathways that you've found interesting or surprising, or just how's the experience been for you? It sounds like you feel like the skills are building on each other.
Yeah, I think, overall, I feel like I really like how it was structured in the pathways. I imagine because it's my first pathway, I've heard that the first 2 levels are the same for every single path.
Yeah.
So some people get a bit bored if they've done multiple. But for me, because I'm still very new, the first 2 are still, I'm doing the first time round. So it's still really interesting to me. I can see why it's structured this way. And I wouldn't mind doing them at least one more time again, because then you get to practice those skills again, especially if you're progressing through the path step by step, only doing one pathway, going from level 1 to level 5. And presumably by that time, you've somewhat forgotten about level 1 and 2. And then because it takes at least a year or a few months, at least, you can be rushing through. If you're meeting with your club every single week and you're speaking at every single meeting, I think you can barely manage to finish one
in
pathway.
A year. Yeah, it takes a while.
So by that time, you like going back to level 1 might be new again to you. And I think that repetition is part of that learning as well. I'm not sure if that was the reason why if they built it in like that, but it wouldn't surprise me, because repetition is always,
I think as well, because there are so many pathways to choose from, and there's 11 now, and they are cutting that down to 6, probably because there was too much choice and it was overwhelming people. Like, which path do I choose?
Oh yeah, that was me. So I was like, all the paths look interesting to me. I can't decide, so I just went with the default one.
Yeah, and most people do, unless they have a specific interest. So if they're coaching, they'll go into the coaching stream, but you're right, they do all start off with level 1, level 2 speeches being pretty much the same. And even the electives in the more advanced levels are from a pool of similar electives. So, but you can tailor them as well. And that's the thing, even if you are going through a pathway the second time, like I've done 4 or 5 or 6 icebreaker speeches over the years in different clubs, and they're very different from what I was doing back when I first joined Toastmasters after the elocution lessons. And the one I did 3 years ago when I joined Mount Gravatt was very different. I mean, there was years and years of life experience difference and the message I wanted to tell. And if I do an icebreaker speech again, it will be entirely different to anything I've done before. So you've got to try to make it different, and the circumstances of your life have changed. So speeches are going to be different whenever you happen to do them.
Yeah. And who you're delivering it to, I guess, makes quite a difference as well. Like people in the club will change. Maybe you've joined a new club. Yeah.
Definitely. It's flexible like that. And some speeches are definitely worth revisiting, and some will focus on specific skills like body language or gestures. And again, there's not too many opportunities that you get to say, okay, I'm just really going to have a good hard look at what my hands and body are doing when I open my mouth, or a speech that focuses on specific, use of words or vocal variety. And it really goes into each facet of public speaking, I feel.
Yeah, no, definitely. So that actually spurred on an answer to the question you've asked me.
Yeah.
To start this off, actually, I'm quite looking forward to, I've spoken to you about this because I guess I mentioned it quickly at the start, but Melanie is currently mentoring me. We just started doing that mentoring relationship.
We have.
Mount Gravatt. Yeah. And I have been speaking to you about doing an elective about interview, doing an interview, and it's just fascinating because when you try and look for a job, you're attending an interview, people would tell you to practice with your peers, and you would maybe with your friends, you maybe write down a few questions and test it on with them. But it's very unstructured. It depends on how good your friend is or family member or whomever is, or if you're talking to someone at university or a corporate counselor, it might be a bit different.
Yes.
But that lesson or that project is structured in such a way that it gives you really good feedback on how you can, because it uses a professional job interview as one of the examples as well. It tells you how you should be professional, how are people expecting answers in that case. So it really does teaches you a lot of things that I think are relevant in all job interviews. The other part of it, you can act as an interviewer in a talk show as well. And unless you're doing that for your job or you're a subject matter expert or something you're invited on, when would you get a chance to practice this in front of audience that all want to listen to you and are all interested in doing that?
Exactly. And that reminds me, I need to have a look at that project. I don't even think I've seen that project, so I need to go and have a look. So I will have a look at that. But again, there's just so many different possibilities and actual skills, projects that focus on real world skills that you can then apply out in the world where you'll need them.
Yeah.
And you get to practice them in this safe, supportive environment. And if it doesn't go to plan, it doesn't matter. You can do it again.
Yeah. I think that's the other thing that I really like about Toastmasters as well, is I think everyone wants to be supportive and wants to create that nice environment because they know it when someone else does it to them, gives it to them, creates a supportive environment. But unless they're really reflective and really remember what the other person was doing this whole time, which you might not unless you have been around that skilled person for a few times and understand how they're the techniques they're actually using, how they're actually structuring it to make everyone feel supported and welcome and things like that. But Toastmasters makes you do that, in terms of the evaluation. It teaches you that first and foremost, you are to be encouraging to other people.
Yes.
So, everyone wants to learn and improve, but the way that the evaluations are structured are given such that you really focus on the positive, and they keep repeating that throughout. And that builds up a really supportive system. So even if, say, you've grown up in a very, very negative household where your conversations with your family or your friends are mainly negative, it can be just how the culture or how it's being structured, right? But
yes,
coming into this environment, you see the difference, but you don't know how to do that. And Toastmasters can teach you how to do that. You can practice it again and again because it helps. You need that practice to make it habit, right?
Yeah, definitely. And everything we do in Toastmasters is evaluated, not just the speeches, but every role pretty much, through the general evaluator to the table topics evaluators to the speech evaluators. There is a very big focus on evaluating. And the nice part is that it's always only people's opinions. So as you may have seen in speech competitions, where in the evaluation contest there's one test speaker and 5 or 6 evaluators, they will be quite different evaluations and picking out different things, and it's all a reflection of how each person found that speech. But it's always supportive. I mean, that is the nature of Toastmasters. And
definitely. That's a skill that I'm trying to practice as well. Like, I've really latched on to the bit about the evaluation where you really, I forgot the exact wording that they use, but you phrase your feedback in a way that is like, this made me feel this way.
Yes.
It's not like you should do this, or you're not telling them how you should feel. You're just telling them how you are feeling, which that's what most people are trying to say. But I don't know. The general figure of speeches that we use usually don't come out like that. I have to change my thought patterns a bit to kind of switch into that Toastmasters frame of mind. I was trying that in like some like conversations with friends, and they looked at me a bit weirdly. So I've just been practicing it on and off.
There is definitely almost a formula to it. You know, what I really liked about your speech was the way you did X, Y, and Z. And you know, if you were looking for a point for improvement, you might want to consider X, Y, and Z. But that's just my opinion. And so it's surprising how applicable that structure can be in any environment where you've got to give feedback to co-workers or family members or friends, and it is a different way of thinking, I think. Are there any other skills that are you noticing a difference in the workplace? Do you get asked to speak, or have you had a chance to put your Toastmaster skills into action at work?
Yeah, I think so. I'm a lot less nervous about speaking now, and just recently, just 2 weeks ago, I've concluded in my workplace, because I work as a sustainability specialist in a multinational company. And I've just concluded a 1 hour, 45-minute workshop with people on teaching them, people across the company, how they can decarbonize, people who are not decarbonize their businesses, because there's many different businesses within this multinational company. And in this 45 minutes, you just talk through. I've definitely used quite a lot of skills that I've done in Toastmasters. Plus, previously, I would have been very, very worried and probably like written down quite a long script and tried to go through too many things in the process. I mean, work definitely helped, because I was able to run through it with someone. There was someone beside me as well. But I think Toastmasters really helped in firstly giving that confidence, and also in just like the short stint, the time I've been in Toastmasters, there have been useful skills. I think especially one thing I've learned in Toastmasters is less is usually more. If you say less, you are less stressed, and people are less stressed listening to you as well.
It's an interesting perspective. I hadn't thought about that, but it's true. There's space to breathe, right? And digest. Alrighty. And what would you say to people out there who may be thinking about Toastmasters like you were all those years ago, and they're very nervous about actually walking into the club? What would you say to them?
I would say don't feel nervous. Or, I mean, it feels very trite giving that say, but as someone who has just recently entered Toastmasters just a year ago, I think all the clubs, no matter which one I've joined, they're all very welcoming. They all have different, I guess, vibes of like the culture of the club. So all of them generally are very supportive, very encouraging. You can go drop into any club. it'd be good to give them a bit of prior notice, but you don't actually need to. I think all Toastmasters clubs are happy for visitors to drop in unannounced, and you don't have to speak during the meeting, which was great. As a first timer, you can just sit there and listen to what other people are saying, just get a feel of it. Until you're confident enough or you're happy to speak, you can just talk to someone beside you. In some clubs, there's people who are assigned to greet guests as well, which I don't think there was a defined role in Brisbane CBE, but maybe because that's a very small club. It's not that many people. It's a lunchtime club. But in Mount Gravatt, there's actually guest greeters, and who, if the guests are happy, introduce you to the rest of the club as well and talk about it. So sometimes it's difficult to join a club because you don't know whether you'll fit in or not, and it's difficult to break the initial ice. I mean, I'm assuming you're not doing your icebreaker speech on like the first visit to a Toastmasters club. I mean, kudos if you are doing that, but it's quite terrifying.
Doesn't happen very often.
But yeah, so people get to know a bit about you, and they can have an easy way to start conversations with you as well. I think that's really nice way to ease into the club.
Yeah, I think the guest greeter role is relatively new at Mount Gravatt, maybe a couple of years old, I want to say. It might go back longer than that, but I remember there being more of a focus on it. And yeah, I like it. It also, because the guest greeter's role is to find out a bit of information about the guest and share it, whatever they're prepared to share, and it's the guest greeter speaking on behalf of the guest to introduce them, it just gives a few little threads that you can go up in the break and just spark up a conversation, and it breaks the ice, as you say. It just puts people at ease. It's like, oh, they actually do care about me and who I am, and I think that's, we try to do whatever we can to put people at ease because we know how scary it can be.
Yeah, definitely. It's just like entering a party where you know nobody, and that guest greeter is there to be your initial friend, and there's a form they're filling up, they're writing down all these things, they're introducing you to the rest of their friends. So it's really nice.
And I think I have an actual inbuilt physiological reaction when I see a new face at the door who's never walked into the meeting. I almost literally stand up and start not quite running towards them, but it's just this automatic reaction. I'm up and I'm making my way out and ready to shake their hand, because I know, especially in our meeting room, the big meeting room, where everyone's up one end and they've got to do that long walk down. So, I think and other people in the club do it as well, but it's just my first reaction. And I might be talking with, a member in mid-conversation, like, excuse me, guest, I've got to go. And it's because I know what it's like walking into that big room. It's like, am I in the right place?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm glad someone is doing that because I haven't reached that level yet. But but it's definitely really nice if someone just comes up to you at the door. I guess that's why in like fancy places they have people to actually greet you at the door.
Yeah, concierges. That's right. That's right. I just know what it's. Well, we all know what it's like to walk into rooms like that. So, yeah, it's a supportive environment for sure. Now, what would you say are your Toastmasters goals for the year? Have you set yourself any goals?
Yeah, so there's a few goals. I'd like to finish at least level 2 of the pathway, which I'm quite close to doing.
Yes.
And I think there's that interview project that I'm wanting to do. Like so far right now, I think I have a few other things in my personal life and working life that's going on in the background. Yeah. So I'm just putting those 2 goals right now, and if I manage to do other things like level 3 or something else like that, decide to start a new pathway, it can be done, but I just don't want to stress myself too much. So you want to keep it fun for the first year.
Yeah, definitely. There's always speaking opportunities and opportunities to do things, but you have to balance any of this stuff with whatever else is going on. So, yeah, I've certainly found that one of the ways of getting through pathways reasonably quickly was to volunteer to speak at the last minute, and that has been so stressful. Some of the times I've volunteered to do speeches might be 5 o'clock, a slot becomes available, and 7 o'clock the meeting starts. But for me now, it's sort of, I know the structure of speeches enough to be able to go, okay, here's a topic, 3 key points, opening, conclusion. I'm somehow going to string it together, but it took quite a while to be able to get to that without thinking like, what am I doing? And why am I doing this? And why am I putting myself under this stress? But I like that stress of being able to smash out a speech quickly if the opportunity arises. It's
when it's uncomfortable, you know that you're growing, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah, there's plenty of opportunities to do that.
Maybe I should make myself a bit more uncomfortable. We'll see. I think we've discussed a few things during our mentoring sessions. I don't think I've written them down somewhere. And I think there's a few other goals that I've mentioned to you, but I've only publicly in this podcast, I've only given 2. So
all right, well,
keep those rests, a bit private just in case I don't get to them.
We'll work on those. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to continuing our mentoring sessions and just seeing where you go with it, because the confidence that you've already shown with your initial speeches and the way you've dived into the club executive very early on in your time with us is like, I can't wait to see where you take your Toastmasters journey.
I think it really helped that, Mel, I'm not just saying this, but you have organized so many things. Like the rest of the executive are well organized and there's lots of experienced members in the club, but you have really put in a fair bit of effort in Mount Gravatt as the president as well. I think that makes it really easy. Plus you being my mentor as well. I think I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's great to have you in the club and to be working with you. So, Brodie, thank you so much for your time today. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you. As I said, I'm really enjoying the mentoring sessions that we have, and I feel that you have so much potential as a speaker and storyteller, in fact. So I can't wait to see how you progress your Toastmasters journey. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Melanie. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to today's show. Head to talkativetoastmaster.com where you'll find the show notes for this and all other episodes, as well as links to some awesome Toastmasters resources. If you found value in today's content, I'd really appreciate if you could share it with friends and colleagues who may be interested, or leave a review on iTunes. This will help more people to find us. Until next time, remember the words of Eleanor Roosevelt. You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. So let's face that fear and step into the spotlight with confidence and grace. Have a great week.